I'm
Mary
looking at the
Frances
camp.
Berry. Yeah, there you go, Mary Frances Berry. I have your book right here. There it is. You are a historian, professor, lawyer, activist, and PhD. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
PhD, 37 honorary PhDs and JDs and so on.
And 12 books too.
Yeah, 13, 14 now.
14? Oh, I miscounted.
14,
Please, 14. There
14.
you go.
This is number
So,
14.
so tell us a little bit about this fine book, Slavery
Okay.
After Slavery.
Well, what I'll tell you in brief compass, and then you, of course, can ask me anything you want to ask me, is that it's stories of Black families who tried to use the law to keep their children from being thrown back into slavery after the Emancipation Proclamation, after the 13th Amendment, when anybody who had common sense would think that slavery was abolished, okay? But it wasn't. And what happened is white planters needed labor. And one way they thought of getting labor was to pretend that Black mothers and fathers gave them their children to become apprentices. And apprenticeship has a long history in England and in the United States. Ben Franklin was an apprentice and so on. You train people to do the trades. Well, they would ran right down to the magistrate's office in the district, these planters, and filled out papers saying, these people can't take care of their children. They gave them to us, and we're going to make them apprentices. And they did it voluntarily. And there's a place on the form that says, what are you going to train them how to do? That's what you do with the and depending on where they were, they'd say pick cotton or pick tobacco or dig holes, whatever they thought that they could claim that they were due. And so they took people's children, wouldn't let them have them if they were the age of 10 or above, or if they thought they were hardy enough to work in the fields. If they were toddlers, the planters didn't want them. They told their parents, if you're leaving here, take those kids. We don't want them. Somebody's got to feed them and whatever, and they can't work. But they kept their boys and girls who were at the age that they could work in the field, okay, and filled out those papers. The statisticians tell us that there were about 4 million slaves in the 1860 population. They tell us that given the ages of children, about 100,000 of them were subject to being apprentices. So this was not a minor problem, okay? Parents tried to get their kids back, obviously, if they they wanted their children, and they wanted the older ones, as one woman said, "If I got the older kids and then I had the younger ones, I'd have somebody to help me." But if they keep the older kids and all us have to go away, what are we supposed to do? Keep in mind that Black people could not get legally married during slavery. So it was easy for them to fill out and say they have no legal parents. They don't want, the children. Just tell lies, to get these people's children. And we know that for a fact that large numbers of these children stayed in apprenticeship, so-called, until their time was served. And many on the same plantation or else hired out to other plantations so that the planter could make money. We also know, and I write about this, some parents went back to try to get their children. There are stories where they were on the road, going at night, sneaking back, trying to get their children, being beaten, driven off the road by the planters, and some were killed, as a matter of fact. And they couldn't get their children. When the Freedmen's Bureau came, people often ask me, well, there was a Freedmen's Bureau. It was only there for a short time because the white conservatives took over again at the end of Reconstruction. But in any case, they had some cases. Parents said, go help me get my children. Please help me find my folk. Help me get my children. And they brought some cases, and they won a few. But most of them, they did not win, because you would think that when Reconstruction and the Freedmen's Bureau came, the Republicans who were in some of the judgeships would side with the parents, okay? But some of them said, "Well, you don't need those children anyway because you don't have anything to take care of them, and so they might as well stay there, and maybe they'll teach them how to do something, and maybe they'll grow up." Now, what was the effect of all of that? The effect of all of that was the poverty pipeline, which we talked today about the prison to school to prison pipeline and all kinds of things. But the effect of that was that Black people remained largely another group of Black people being poor. Okay. And what I decided to do was not just write about them, because my friend Sandy Darity, who's an economist and who has a book on the wealth gap, and all this came out during reparations, asked me during the pandemic if I would sit down with his young economists on the phone because we couldn't meet and listen to them while he was writing his wealth gap book. And he said, "If we get anything wrong, I know you'll tell me because you've been doing that all your life." So I listened. And then I finally said to the children who were on the phone, the young people, what about the children? You keep talking about adults and reparations and jobs and people not getting paid, but do you know about the children? And none of them knew. Nobody ever taught them. They never knew. They didn't know any of this had happened. He didn't know. And so I tried to get one of the young people to write this story. And they said, "Well, it'd take too long, and I got my dissertation to do, and I got this and that." So I wrote it myself. And so I scoured around, opened up archives, got people to violate whatever they were doing, librarians who were very helpful to get this story. And I already knew about 10 cases that had been in the appellate courts that Freeman's Bureau had brought, and the parents didn't win, but I knew those cases. I traced those families all the way up to the late 20th century to see if they ever got over poverty, if they ever, how long they lived, all the things that people die from, the diseases and all the rest. They were working class people all over. Hardly anybody ever went to jail for anything. One time was for stealing a hog when they were hungry off the plantation, things like that. And that they never were able to get a substantial, education. And so I asked myself, if these children had not been kept that way, and some of them took up the names of the planters. We know many Black people who have the names of the planters where they were. In my family, we come from the Southall plantation in Tennessee. And so on my mother's side, the last name is Southall. Okay. So I'm familiar with this whole thing. And so what I told them, and I decided to write this so we could add to our discussions, another source of poverty and exploitation, and then all worry about the children. And in tracing them, some I've met even to this generation who are still poor, who are still working, still the kind of low wage jobs. And then there are some exceptions. There's one woman who is running uh, one of those programs, Upward Bound, and all the programs for children out in Harvey, Illinois, who was a descendant of one of these families. And she persisted and insisted on doing something and is still doing something. But they weren't criminals or anything like that. There was then finally the other. So I said, if they had all been able to work and accumulate resources, nobody would need to be talking about, reparations or anything else. And then a comparison, and I'll be finished with this part, of a white man, one of some brothers who were left plantations by their father. And he, like many white men, impregnated a slave woman on his plantation. But and he was already married, of course, and had a family. He liked the boy that was born, whose name was George. This was in Alabama. And so he did everything he could. George was a house Negro, as we called it. George did, everything, took good care of him. And when slavery was abolished, he told George, "If you just stay here with me and you will be cared for as you are now, by the time I die, you'll be rich. I'll make you rich." George stayed. Okay. So George would be one of these people that I'm talking about who suffered if he had been in that same category. The man's brothers were mad at him for taking up and taking care of this Negro. And we all got, we impregnated slave women. It was common. We didn't go out, taking ownership of this. And he said, "Well, I'm doing it because it's right." And by the time that father died in the 1890s, George was wealthy, and they now, intergenerationally, have a wonderful family. I know the ones now in Alabama, Limestone. It's called Darden Industries. It is a services, farm services, place where they do, tractors and seed and all the stuff farmers use, and they have a big farm themselves. And they have been very smart about honoring using this money and helping other people and doing all these things. The details are in the book. But I asked then, what if all the white men who impregnated these black women, raped them, so to speak, if they had taken their child and taken ownership and done something for them? Think of all the sources of resources. If people did the right thing, they should have done it in the first place, but after they did it, that they take ownership, own up to it, what we would be like today. And so say that the stories I tell are individual stories, which we don't have many of people during that period. But what happened to them is an American story. It really is an American story.
Well, Dr. Berry, I remember when I was in 1976, I was in 8th grade, of course, later on that year, 9th grade, and that was the bicentennial. I didn't think much of it, just something that happened when you're in 8th and 9th grade. Well, I think, but the year before, that year before, was it 75 when the TV show Roots came out, which
Yes.
was a big, big deal. So that was
Oh,
like the
yeah.
first time anybody knew about slavery, including yours truly, because they showed it and teaching in school. And a lot of the history, even post-slavery, wasn't passed down and handed down through family for various reasons, good reasons. And I say that to say this. Okay, that's 50 years ago. Are we going to teach the history of this country as it needs to be told to everyone?
No. There's a struggle by people. The battle that we're in right now, and slavery after slavery is just one piece of it, is a battle to keep white supremacy from being imposed and brutalizing us again. Du Bois said after Reconstruction, the came down and darkness descended again. When we thought something was, positive, everything was good. And now what we're in is, what Jeremiah and the Bible calls the captivity, where in fact people are trying to grind us down. The real question is whether we're going to let ourselves be ground down and whether the good people, like the guy who took care of George and kept his promises, are going to do the right thing and to keep it from happening, and whether we have people who will go through the fire and, like many of our leaders have in the past, and do whatever is necessary to try to see to it that they bring us through this and that we stay together and do it. So it's a serious question as to how we will come out of this.
And was when I was a kid, of course, or even 40 years ago, I used to hear the term, maybe 50 years ago, uplifting the race.
Right.
Now, of course, that 50 years ago, and you were born a little bit earlier than yours truly. Uh,
1938.
There you go, 38, right? Me, 62. So the point is that how do you get the younger people to take the torch and someone go through the fire? Who's gonna do it? How we pass the torch on? I'm almost giving up in 2026. I see you haven't given up, but I think a lot of people have given up. What are
No,
we
I
doing?
haven't
Get
I
back in the
haven't
fight?
given up, and I talk to people and encourage them not to give up. I spend a lot of my time listening and talking to people. We have to teach the young people ourselves because they're not gonna let us teach them. You don't want them to read, don't want them. When we came through, like when I was in high school, my high school history teacher had a curriculum that the city put out, and you weren't supposed to learn anything about black people. And she would sneak stuff in. I mean, she literally give it to us to read, and then she would tell us to come over to her house on the Fisk campus after school if we wanted to and sit with her and her mama. And then we would go over this stuff and learn this stuff. That's how we learn the history of our people because nobody wanted us to learn. We then, with the civil rights movement, we had all these changes. And then, of course, every time there's a change, there's a backlash. You have to expect it. That's the history of people like us who have been down and pushed down and exploited. Is you move forward and you get so far, and then they slap you back as hard as they can, if they can, and then you don't go all the way back. Like some man told me the other day, Republican, "You know what's gonna happen to you black people, since the immigrants are being deported, y'all gonna have to go back and pick that fruit and do all that stuff, and those will be the kind of jobs you'll get." I thought he was kidding, and I said, "You're kidding." And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "Once they all gone, who do you think is gonna do it? We're not gonna do it." So you are. So the effort is to keep us from don't go to a predominantly white university that's prestigious, which many people aspire to do, because then you might get a better job and whatever. Don't go to an HBCU, as my nephew was told about his daughter who just graduated and is going to college, and he was picking colleges. Because if you go to ABC, we're going to look at your record when you turn it. If it says you went to an HBCU, we're going to figure you black. We're going to turn you down. So what we want to do is cram you into this little tight thing. And then we don't want you to vote for anybody you want. So if you do vote, it'll be somebody that'll kick you. And we don't want any black people who will, in fact, do the right thing in public life. I mean, I don't, talk about Clarence Thomas is easy, but there are all these other people out there who are, exploitative and, all the rest of it. Let them come in. As someone also said to me, well, y'all could all become Republicans and then y'all could all vote for the kind of stuff we want. So you do have some options. So, but people are fighting back. You see that some people are fighting back. The voters are going out. Here in Louisiana, where I am right now, they are changing the maps, and doing all that stuff. And people just crowded the polls the other day. And now the people are now bringing suits and protesting against the governor, who is really quite a right wing guy. But we have to fight. But we also have to, as Jeremiah said, we have to stay together, close together, the people you care about, until we get through this. But it's not a surprise because it has happened today. I mean, if you go to Brian Stevenson's thing down in Montgomery, look at all those people who were lynched. One of them is in the chapter I'm talking about, because the family that had some of these children disappeared after they became protesters, along with a guy, Jim Turner, who was trying to get everybody the right to vote after the Klan claim. And I was trying to figure out what happened to why did their parents disappear and they end up being adopted by another group. And I found out that they had joined Turner and they had been working on voting and they were killed. And when Turner was arrested, he was lynched. That story's down there in Montgomery.
Mary Frances Berry, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.